We're all mad here. Hello, hello, hello. What ho? Welcome back to another exciting adventure of reading the Bible again for the first time on the playlist Rethinking Revelation on my channel, Radio Free Anarchy. I'm your host, Travel Mateus. There is the legend of St. Augustine's conversion where his mother Monica has been praying for him because he's just such a lech. He's a debaucherous lech of just indulging his sinful desires. And so Monica has been praying for him for his whole life, I suppose. And one day when Augustine is a man, he is in a garden and he hears children playing and singing in Latin, tolle lege, take up and read, take up and read. And so he takes that as an indication that he should take up and read the scriptures. So then he takes up and reads the scriptures and is converted, and the rest is history. This is the third installment of reading the Bible again for the first time. And the more and more I continue to think about this subject, the more and more I am convinced that scripture is not something a person simply picks up and reads. It requires having prerequisite knowledge, almost like an introductory course, a primer, if you will, which I think that this is an example of. I'm giving you a primer to prime the pump, hopefully to create an interest for you. I have so many people in my existence that are so hostile to the Bible, but my assessment is that their reaction to the Bible is really the reaction to a community's interpretation of the Bible, because the Bible itself doesn't necessarily communicate the ideologies that the community says that it does. So it might just be the community that you're reacting against rather than the book itself. Think of a book burning, right? We're gonna burn Fahrenheit 451. We're gonna burn Harry Potter. Uh, there's nothing wrong with the book itself. It's the response and the attitude of the people, if that makes any sense. If one wants to understand the revelation that is in the Bible, and by revelation, I just simply mean the stories that it tells, which reveals something about something, that's what revelation is in a simplistic, oversimplistic fashion. Because the Bible itself, in my opinion, remember, all of this is my opinion. The Bible is not a simplistic document. It's layered, it's dense, it's symbolic, it's precise, and it doesn't contradict itself, regardless of whether or not you've heard someone say it contrary. Yeah, it does not contradict itself. You just have to understand how to read it. And sometimes even familiarity. Oh, I know what this story's about. Sometimes even familiarity is detrimental to understanding. There is a principle of interpretation that I was exposed to at Moody Bible Institute, which was called the plain sense of interpretation, which says if the plain sense makes the best sense, seek no other sense, lest it lead you into nonsense. Now, that sounds sensible on the surface, and I understand the reason behind it, but I do not condone or agree with the allegation whatsoever. In fact, I would modify the pithiness of the saying in this way. If the plain sense does not make the best sense, then perhaps one should seek another sense which makes better sense, even if at first it sounds like nonsense. Because I find often revelation appears stranger than fiction before it appears coherent. I mean, talking snakes, talking donkeys, floating axe heads, women turning into pillars of salt. And this becomes even more important once we realize something most readers overlook. All translation is interpretation. The moment the Hebrew or the Greek or the Aramaic moves into your original language or your native language, your first language, the moment that happens, choices have been made, nuances have been shifted, cultural assumptions even enter the process. Words with multiple layers of meaning become narrowed, and therefore, the English reader is already engaging someone else's interpretive framework before the reading even begins. This is why I keep emphasizing the distinction between what the text says and what the text means by what it says, because those are not always identical categories. Language is metaphor. English is a metaphor. English, German, Spanish, it's all metaphor. And we all know what is a metaphor. It's for sheep, horses, cows. Language communicates through pattern, through repetition, through symbolism, through allusion, especially in the scriptures. And the thing that I came to realize was that the scriptures often use the metaphors interchangeably and overlappingly. And if you're not aware of it, it can appear at times as if the Bible's contradicting itself. When the layers of the author's intention are finely crafted pieces of artwork, just like the Mona Lisa. Look at the Mona Lisa and see what you notice about the background. Over her left shoulder, if I'm remembering this correctly, is the horizon, and it's straight right here. But over her right shoulder, there's perspective, and the horizon, it's at a different level. That's what happens when I wax off the script. Another major misconception is the assumption that the Bible is linear, as though Revelation begins at A, travels through the alphabet, and seamlessly arrives at Z. But Scripture rarely behaves that way. I have found often reading the middle of the story becomes the key that unlocks the beginning. Earlier revelation shapes later revelation, and the latter illuminates the former. And suddenly, passages you thought you understood appear entirely different under new light, under new circumstances, maybe even under new information. This means Revelation contains turning points, moments where the reader is forced to revisit previous conclusions. You might change your mind about a certain passage and think, I don't think that's what this is about anymore. Not because the text changed, but because the reader changed. No man can read the Bible twice because he's no longer the same man and it's no longer the same text. And perhaps that transformation is part of the experience. Which brings me again to Proverbs 25. It is the glory of God to conceal a matter, and it is the glory of kings to search it out. Notice what the proverb implies. God conceals, kings investigate. This means that maturity requires pursuit. It requires effort, patience, curiosity, discernment, determination. And perhaps that is why so much of Scripture feels like it is hidden in plain sight. But veiled beneath the symbols, the patterns, the repetitions, the prophetic imagery, and the thematic structures, there is accessibility. It's not absent, it's there for you to access. You just have to be patient. It's kind of like looking at a 3D image poster, if you know what I mean. You have an image that is just this amalgamation of what doesn't even make sense to your eyes, but then if you let your eyes relax, the 3D image appears and you see a dolphin breaching the surface of the water. And the scriptures almost invite us to tumble down the rabbit hole with Alice. The deeper one goes, the more interconnected the symbols become. Words echo one another across pages. Images repeat themselves in different imagery. Patterns emerge. Patterns repeat. Patterns reverse. Patterns upside down themselves. And suddenly the Bible is no longer acting or behaving like a disconnection of random prophetic books or epistles. It begins behaving like a unified consciousness, communicating through layered revelation. So I mentioned Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Many readers assume the meaning is obvious. But even here, translation choices have been made, and they shape your interpretation. The Hebrew word eretz is commonly translated as earth, but in many contexts, the word more fundamentally means land. In fact, let me correct myself there. It is my opinion that eretz should never be translated as earth, because earth gives us a macrocosm idea that is the entire system of the seven continents. I don't think that that's what eretz refers to ever, ever. Eretz means land. And it means land as far as you can see. Where you're standing, as far as you can see, that's Eretz. And then wherever you go, Eretz, 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 Eretz. That might become more clear as we continue down this rabbit hole tumble. So I'll try to keep onto the script and not improvise. But the distinction needs to be made. There are passages in the book of Isaiah where within the same verse, it translates Eretz as earth, meaning the entire earth, meaning Australia and China and Europe and North America. And then in the same verse, it translates Eretz as land. But in English, you see earth, which is a different word than land. You understand what I'm saying? In Hebrew, it's the same word, translated the same way. Translated the same way each time. Because translation decisions often influence theological conclusions, or even philosophical ones. From one perspective, Genesis 1 may function as a merism. Heavens and earth is a poetic device which represents totality, heavens and earth, left and right, right? Left and right, everything, heavens and earth, everything, all creation, as it were. And within that framework, the verse serves as a grand declaration of cosmic origins. But another perspective may interpret the phrase through a larger biblical idea, a biblical pattern, a biblical theology, seeing heavens and earth as covenantal language, symbolically connected to and indicating the nation of Israel. People, a nation, also a prophetic structure. And this is where the analogy of Scripture becomes important. Remember this principle, the analogy of Scripture. This principle that Scripture ultimately interprets Scripture. This is the principle that Scripture is its own interpreter. If you find a place in Scripture that is confusing, keep reading. The rest will shine light back onto the confusion that you might be experiencing. It's not contradiction, it's coherence. And if we aren't tuned in, we're going to drop out. The Bible is its own interpretive ecosystem. And honestly, this changes the entire experience of reading because now you are no longer merely consuming words, you're tracing patterns, architectures of meaning, connections hidden beneath the surface layer of the text. You stop reading the scriptures as though it were flat and begin engaging in its multi-dimensional revelation. Perhaps the most important question is not which interpretation is entirely correct, but rather, are these interpretations mutually exclusive? Could the scriptures be operating on multi levels simultaneously? Literal, symbolic, prophetic, and experiential all at once? That's a possible way to approach the subject. However, it is my opinion the Bible is never to be taken literally. Never to be taken literally, in my opinion. Because maybe the goal is not merely to read the Bible. Maybe the goal is to mature into the kind of person capable of perceiving the depth concealed within the revelation itself.